Hi everyone, my name is Mastan Moqaddam and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the executive director at Cross Cultural Expressions. And I'd like to welcome you to the Access for All YouTube episode where we're speaking to members of the physical disabilities community. This is a series of 6 YouTube videos that we are creating by Cross-Cultural Expressions in partnership with the Access for All Underserved Cultural Communities Subcommittee of the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. During this series, we will be exploring a variety of topics related to the intersection of the deaf, hard of hearing, blind, partially sighted, visually impaired, and physically disabled individuals' lives as it relates to mental health, well-being, and the accessing of mental health services. This is an opportunity for members of these communities to sit together and discuss concerns, share resources, and give insight as to the work that can be done to keep individuals and communities uplifted and living their best lives. Before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I want to make sure to share with everyone the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health's Access Helpline number. For mental health resources and support, please call the 24/7 helpline at 1-800-854-7771. That's 1-800-854-7771. I really just want to give everyone an opportunity, everyone on our panel, to introduce themselves. So we can start with Minou, and you can tell us a little background about your connection to this topic, to the physically disabled community, and yeah, whatever else you want to share about yourself.
Okay. My name is Minou Michlin. I had polio at the age 3, and I'm 81-year-old now. And I was born in Iran during the peak of World War II. And my parents were very supportive and provided me with a lot of opportunities, and I've been able to move on with my life. I have been in physiotherapy almost all my life, including to today. And I'm also a clinical social worker, and I have my doctorate in social work, and I'm a retired professor of social work, and I'm doing volunteer work with families in need in Los Angeles. I don't know what else you want me to say.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Carlos, would you like to go next?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carlos Benavides. I'm a C2 to a T1 tetraplegic. Along with Ray, I co-chair the Patient Advisory Council at Rancho Los Amigos, where we deal with all types of disabilities, from stroke to traumatic brain injury. And outside of that, I'm president of the Los Angeles County Commission on Disabilities. So I do quite a lot with disabilities, myself and Ray. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So lovely to have you here with us. Kim, would you like to go next?
Hi, my name is Kim Hudson. Oh, I'm not supposed to use my last name, right?
Well, you could use the last name.
Okay. And I have cerebral palsy. I'm a social worker. I've worked with people with various different types of disabilities and chronic illnesses for my whole career as a social worker. Prior to becoming a social worker, I was one of the first children in LAUSD to be mainstreamed and to take part in regular public education. And I was very active in making sure that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and took part in demonstrations and made sure that my college campus was made accessible. And I was one of those people who chained myself to stuff, before the ADA passed, so that we could have access to buses and public transportation, public buildings. So now I'm happy to say that there's a whole generation of young people who grew up with a lot more accessibility and access to resources that we didn't have as a young person.
Wonderful. Such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. Shoreh, would you like to go next?
So, hi everybody, my name is Shoreh, and I got polio when I was 3 years old, and I was only disabled person during my whole life, elementary school, middle school, and high school, and so on. And my education background, I have a master's in food science.
Very nice to have you. Thank you, Shoreh.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Ray, would you like to go?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Ray Pizarro. I sustained a traumatic spinal cord injury in 1993. I became a quadriplegic at the age of 20. And I've been involved in the disabled community by working about 9 years as a peer mentor, helping newly injured patients and their families at the rehabilitation hospital, and also sit on the patient advisory council there at Rancho with my partner Carlos. Also help run a nonprofit organization called Michlin Foundation that we help also different individuals with certain mobility impairments. So really active in the disabled community. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here. I also sit on the County Commission on Disabilities. So we stay busy, and I really love giving back to our community and helping those in need. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Okay, well, thank you all for those great introductions. And I really wanted to start by discussing, obviously we're sitting here really trying to have a conversation about the correlation and the prevalence of mental health and mental health issues kind of when they meet the intersection of physical disabilities in people's lives, because I think that you certainly can't ignore the fact that when you are diagnosed or born with or have a physical disability, that it really impacts your mental health in multiple different ways. So my first question is, if you're willing, if anybody, and it's open to anybody, is willing to kind of share your experiences around your physical disability and how it's impacted your mental health through the years. The conditions that it has brought up, the obstacles, the hurdles, and also if you want to talk about, it's not just the disability affecting the mental health, but sometimes the community's reactions or the world's reactions that really affect mental health of the individual. And so I'd love to hear your experiences around that for anybody that wants to start.
Since nobody's starting, I'm going to be there to give an example. Probably I had the most supportive family when I was growing up, but it's still, I have many, many incidents of being very sad because of the reaction of other people toward me. even though my polio was not severe, but it was enough that I couldn't run and I limped and I fell a lot. It was on my lower part of my body. Is that, for example, and by the way, one of the amazing things that I'm grateful for is that I was included in all the physical activities of the school. I was not exempt from phys education or any, and I loved sports. I went early to school so that I can play basketball when nobody else was in school, and I could have the ball and the basket all to myself until the others came. Then, of course, I was out. And the most parts that probably elementary school is where I felt the most pain by wanting to be active and do things that other kids are doing, is when, for example, they would take, the gym teacher would say, okay, 4 of the best athletes would pick partners for a team. And one time I was the last one that was picked. And by the time my name was called, there was the other 25 kids on the teacher's side, and I was alone on the other side of the field. Was probably one of the most, even now that I'm talking about it, I become tearful, painful experiences that I had. Or my brother coming home and telling my mother that when I was participating in a walking race in the field in the back of the school, the boys on his side were imitating me and making fun of me and saying, how can a girl who walks like that participate in the walking race relay? It was a relay. So the incidence was more from the outside that was coming in, and my brother came home crying to my mother that you have to take her out of phys ed because people are making fun of her. And my mother said, those people who are making fun of her are stupid, and there is no way I'm taking her out of phys ed. So it was a lot more from the community and then it affected my adult life, but that's another story. I don't want to talk too much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You know, Kim, you were talking about, being one of the first people who was mainstreamed into in LAUSD. And we just heard Minou talk about, obviously Minou was growing up in Iran. And so I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was such thing as mainstreaming. You just went to the regular school, yes?
I went to regular school, and other kids who had physical disabilities like hip dislocations or other physical disabilities, their parents took them out of gym and they did not participate in physical activities. But I really loved, I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time, but one of the other incidents was that I had learned how to jump rope, but from the rope being in front of my feet, and slowly turned it myself. When I went to school, I saw that the kids run and jump and the rope goes very fast. So I said to the girls that I would be the end and I would turn the rope, but at the end of your playing, you stay and give me 20 times jump right in front of the rope. So I didn't, it was also probably my own perseverance. I didn't give up not being part of jumping rope, but I made a place for me in that, which is what today education and educators try to do. So it was also my own
Perseverance.
perseverance.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to ask, thank you for sharing that. I was going to ask you, Kim, what was that like for you, being one of the first to be mainstreamed, and how do you feel about the mainstreaming process as it affects kids' mental well-being, kids with disabilities?
I think that it was very difficult to be one of the first kids mainstreamed into school. It's always, I don't know if everybody else on the panel can agree with this. It's always hard to be the only person in a room for whatever reason, for your disability, for many reasons that you might be different from the rest of the people in the room, the only woman in the room, whatever. And children can be very cruel. That is a fact. So they just, I think now they have an easier time just because it's not so unusual. I went into public school as a 5th grader. And now it's more regular practice for children to start in kindergarten and continue on with their cohorts through school. So I think it's easier once kids get exposed to people with all types of physical and other types of differences from a young age. People are more accepting. It was very difficult to, as a 5th grader, be mainstreamed and be the only kid in the room with any kind of different disabilities. It was very traumatic. And in fact, I insisted, I had gone to a summer camp for only kids with disabilities. And I said to my mother that I would only continue in public school if I could also continue going back to my summer camp with other kids with disabilities, because it gave me a chance not to be the only person in the room with my issues, and to build my community of people with disabilities as well.
So all in all, are you in favor of the mainstreaming?
Yes, I am, especially now because there's a lot more support services, and I believe that every child should have equal access to the best education available. And the thing was, before mainstreaming, there were kids with disabilities, including myself, who were just kind of put together, and it wasn't a very good education because there were so many different types of kids with disabilities with different cognitive function, and it was hard for one teacher to meet all those needs. Now, everybody is mainstreamed to the best of their ability and given support services they need. So it's a much better education, and I'm glad for the experience. I really am. I'm thankful to my parents, and they were really on the forefront and fighting for my ability to access equal education. So I really applaud them for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I was going to kind of pass the torch to Ray because we, heard a little bit about Minou and Kim's experience, having had their disabilities since, very young. But you coming into this at the age of 20, can you talk to us a little bit about, the mental health aspect of what you were going through?
Yes, absolutely. I think I suffered. In hindsight, I think my mental health was really severe at that age, at 20. Just a little background: I was always into athletics, playing basketball in high school, running, going to the beach. Just, I had a cool new job at the airport. I graduated from high school. I was really close of moving out with my girlfriend and just starting my young life. And all of a sudden, my independence, my mobility gets taken away in 1 second. And it was hard to process. I dealt with a lot of emotional issues, anger issues, maybe some self-pity, but I hated being pitied at the same time. The way people looked at me, oh, poor person, he's 20 years old. Oh, I'm so sorry. It just didn't feel like, I didn't want to hear that. And yeah, it took a big toll. And I think also how my mental health suffered was my parents. My mom, her and my brothers were the only people I had. And seeing them struggle with my catastrophic injury, I think it affected me as much as them as well, because they go through the emotional roller coaster of seeing I was the oldest son, and all of a sudden I lose all mobility. I can't do much for myself, and I think to this day now I still carry a fraction, some kind of percentage of it. I just don't focus on it anymore, or I ignore it and feed off of positive things. And also I noticed that staying busy and focusing on different projects, I forget I'm in a chair. I forget about my disability, and I go out and do photography, volunteer, involved in all these things that I don't have time to really focus. So that's how it helps me cope with my mental state of being physically disabled for so many years.
Thank you for that. Shoreh, did you want to talk about, I know that you mentioned that your polio also started at age 3, I believe you said. And how has, the mental health aspect of it impacted your life?
You are right. When I was 3 years old, I got polio. And I remember as I had a different experience in my life. When I had a PE class, they said, "Oh, you cannot do that. You have to just sit and watch the other students." They didn't allow me to participate. But when I was
Iran?
Pardon?
This is in Iran?
Yes, back in Iran. That's right. But I would like just to keep me active, and I played with my older brother and older sister and my cousins. My cousins and my brother and my sister look at me as the same person, and I was very active to play different activities that they played at that childhood. But unfortunately, at the school, they didn't allow me to do anything as a PE activity. Mm-hmm. And still, I remember I was really, really like to play with my classmates, but I couldn't.
Thank you for sharing that. Carlos, I'm not quite sure, maybe you can share with us what phase in your life did the disability start, and can you talk a little bit about also how it impacted your mental health?
Yeah, I could speak to both sides of that. I didn't get hurt until 2003. Okay. It was really hard when I got hurt because I was a student musician. I used to travel a lot. I'm an artist over at Rancho. Along with Ray, we take a lot of photographs. But I think what made me a strong advocate is all the challenges I had to go through at that age. When I came home, I was in bed for 1 year and 3 months before they even sent me to a doctor. Okay, and that was on account of the system. They had nobody that had, I guess, disability or workman's compensation at the time. So in order for me to get into Rancho, they wanted me in there, but they couldn't get me in there because they had nobody that could maneuver that system. So I entered Rancho as a polio victim. The only bad thing is when I go to therapy, I was up in therapy as a spinal cord, but they couldn't treat me because I didn't have polio. So the polio physician couldn't see me. The spinal cord physician couldn't see me because I wasn't a spinal cord. So I had to maneuver a lot of things. That's where I became a strong advocate for people and realizing the challenges that they had and the ones I had. Aside from that, my parents were older, okay? Unlike, I'm blessed, I'm happy that a lot of these parents were acceptable. My parents didn't accept the fact that I was disabled. My dad tried to take my walker from me when I was trying to stand up. They wouldn't let me be in my wheelchair. I had nothing set up, okay? And like I said, I wouldn't have been as bad off if I wouldn't have stayed in bed for that 1 year and 3 months. So I ended up messing up myself more than anything else. My wife was the one that helped me. She turned me, she had no medical experience. And my story is I got hurt in 2003, saw my first doctor in 2005, and I had my first therapy in 2007.
Wow.
And I didn't get a spinal cord doctor till 2010.
Wow.
So during all these challenges we had to go through, it really messed with me mentally. But that's when I started getting together with people like Ray. We started working with our foundation and realizing, you know what, there's more to life than just being in a chair. Okay, so the challenges, I hear the word disability a lot. I'm not disabled. I can do anything anybody else does. I just have to adapt to it differently. Ray and I will tell you there's only two types of people in this world. There's disabled people and there's tabs. A tab's just a temporarily able-bodied person because by age, illness, or an accident, you're going to end up using crutches, a walker, a cane. The only way to avoid that is if you pass away, so then it won't matter. And I think our goal in life, myself and Ray at least, I know that for a fact, is that we want to make sure by the time you or one of your family members gets to where we're at, we've transitioned enough so you don't have to go through the same thing we did.
I love that. I'd never heard tabs before. I don't know if anybody, Ray had, but I had never heard that tabs before. And I'm actually really glad you brought that up because, we constantly say disabled, 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 but through my experience just doing the interviews really and talking to different people, it really has occurred to me, as I'm sure it has occurred to all of you, that it's really finding an ability to adapt to whatever circumstance you have. And I think that's true for all humans. I think everybody has something that they need to learn to adapt to. So how does that word impact your lives? This term of disability constantly being.
Actually, I don't use the word disabled. I use the word able. And I do argue, I do have these arguments with a bunch of my friends. I said, why am I disabled and you're not? I said, I did a presentation one time and I told him, you wear glasses, right? He says, yeah. I said, well, 10 years ago, you would have been visually impaired. Now, since we have all these frames, Ray-Ban and everything else, people with glasses are accepted all over. They don't look at that as a challenge anymore. Okay. One day our wheelchairs are going to be, that there's going to be enough because, ADA was written 40 years ago when the only time you saw anybody in a wheelchair was when their parents were taking them to church on Sunday, maybe taking them out to the park, and then they put them away for the rest of the week. I hate to say it, but that's just the way it was. Now you see wheelchairs all over the place. Ray and myself, we drive, we drive from our wheelchairs, we drive from our vans, and we don't really let anything hold us down. And we keep each other up. Ray and I keep each other up all the time. We speak 2 or 3 times a day, and we can almost tell when something's going wrong just by our voice. And we get ourselves out of whatever it is.
Yeah, I chime in also as well that I believe that the word disability needs to get revised. There needs to be a revision. As time goes by, the perception of people that don't have anyone who's disabled, don't have a friend, don't know what that life's about. Just hearing the word disability might give them a bad or look towards us that we're inept or not able to function, have jobs, have lives, have families. And I think a revision is needed, just like the universal disability symbol. I think they were working on, some places have adapted that symbol of a person in a chair with movement. And I think these are the things that need to be thought about: physically challenged, or just like Carlos mentioned before. But there needs to be a better word, because before it was crippled, right? And then we moved to disability,
Handicap.
and handicap. So those are all disabling, like, words that I don't really like, but as a person with a challenge. So it definitely needs to be not only revised as the name, but education along with it, not just with a little tagline, but maybe a nicer definition.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you because, in the work that I do as a therapist, I really see how words impact people's mental health, and certainly labels impact people's mental health and view of themselves, not just, what other people think, but as soon as someone puts a label on you, then you start to, especially children, really start to take that in, and it really can shift the view of themselves. And so I think that's really important. Kim, you talked about how you were very active in bringing about the American Disabilities Act. Can you tell us a little bit about life before the ADA, and then what got you involved in really fighting for that, and what has shifted in your opinion since?
Sorry, upon reflection, I wanted to go back because I really realized that part of the times that I struggled the most with my mental health were times of transition. In other words, I grew up, and the time that I was mainstreamed was a very difficult time for me in terms of my mental health, because I felt very different. And I had wished that there was more support for me at that time as a child to deal with that, and for the other children around me to really talk about what it's like to have somebody different in the school, and what it was like for me to be the only kid with a disability. The next time that I really felt that pressure or difficulty was when I went off to college, because my parents really made it pretty, I led a pretty sheltered life, really. They made it pretty easy for me around my house, and I didn't really have an opportunity to realize what I would need help with in terms of my day-to-day life. The fact that I couldn't run a vacuum cleaner, the fact that I couldn't change my own bed sheets, and I really didn't have the tools that I needed as a young adult. And I really wish that my parents had a heart-to-heart talk with me about, you know what, maybe you're always going to need to have some help with some things, and let's make a list of those things, and let's find you, a personal care assistant or attendant, because I really had to go through some really difficult transitions. Now, the reason that, to bring it back around to the ADA, that I thought the Americans with Disabilities Act was so important, and I really wanted to fight for it, was not only was I going through those mental transitions, but I couldn't get on public transportation. I couldn't go to many buildings, including doctor's offices or public buildings. I really was afraid that I would never get a job because there wasn't any reasonable accommodation that I could ask for or anything like that. So, and I went to a college that promised to make itself accessible within the first year that I was there by building a elevator to the classroom complex. And it took them all 4 years that I was there to finish that. And I had to fight and fight and fight. But as other people on the panel have said, when you become an advocate for yourself, you also develop strategies to be able to help others as well. But anytime there was a big transition in my life, that's when I faced the most struggle with my mental health. And I was glad that my college had a counseling center and I took advantage of that. And luckily my family was very, very supportive of my getting mental health assistance when I needed it.
Was your disability something you were born with, Kim? Or-
Yes. Cerebral palsy usually happens to people at birth or directly after birth, although it can happen as a result of any lack of oxygen to the brain, like in an accident or something like that. But it's usually because a person is born prematurely and they don't get enough oxygen to the brain.
You know, I wonder, and I'm hoping you guys can kind of bring light with your experience to this. In terms of mental health, I wonder what is more difficult because kids are so resilient to begin with. So being born with a disability or getting, you know, acquiring the disability at a relatively young age, I wonder if that kind of helps you just kind of move through life differently than, say, someone like Carlos or Ray, who acquired it at an older age. And I'm sure there's challenges to both, but I'm just wondering, like, what has your experience been with that, and maybe people's reactions? If anybody wants to talk to that.
I think that then it's from early childhood that the being differently able happens. Is that I think the family and the parents are the ones who need to receive mental health and counseling about how to raise the child. And usually today there are many resources available. It just happened that my mother had a tremendous resilience, but the things that she did was what I see now. We are recommended by mental health for parents, but I think that we should put a lot of our energy in for the system that the child is in, whether it's the school, whether it's the family, whether it's a recreation, whether it's physical activity, whether it's summer camp, that when they're very young, it's their environments that is shaping. When we are young, is our environment that is shaping us. But when so the issue is those who start early in life and those people who have had a standard common life, and then suddenly an accident happens and they're losing some of their previous abilities and have to make adjustment, is very different. And the reaction of the family is very different, because probably their feeling of loss is so much more greater than when you have a child and you hope that they would grow and they would become more capable, and then you have had a capable child, and then you lose some of those abilities. I don't know if I make sense.
Yeah. Anybody else want to speak to
Yeah,
that?
I think she's right on that. But I also want to take it one step further, that youth now, okay, it's so social media out there that parents sometimes don't want to admit that the child has some type of learning disability, has autism. And that's accepted out there. There's different forms of it. But yet there's a lot of young parents that don't want to think that, hey, my kid has something, instead of getting the resources and just fixing that light little issue that might be happening. They wait until it's way too late, or till they go to school. One of my grandkids didn't want to go to school no more because he was different than his friends. So, we sat him down, we explained everything, we took him to a couple of places, and he was getting straight A's, but it's just his friends didn't realize how hyper he was. So, it's that, and the teachers also. Right away, they say, well, you know what, you're a troublemaker, let's move you. I think they need a lot of sensitivity training out there, and a lot of education. I think that's what's really missing out there. And I mean, that's even included with the physicians, with a lot of the doctors you go to. Ray and I go to the doctor. You can't treat me the same way that you treat Ray, because we're two different symptoms, same wheelchairs, but we're two different symptoms. And they don't stop to look at that. They were taught one way, and I think I wish that they could just take everybody as an individual, not as a number, or not, hey, you got 3 minutes, tell me what's wrong with you. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done out there.
Yeah, that's a good point, Carlos. Just real quick for me to share this piece is also, it depends on culturally and what country you're from and how they perceive people with disabilities. Because I know in some countries they believe people with disabilities are bad luck, a bad omen. So can you imagine growing up in that, where they're hesitant to let you in their stores because they see you could bring them bad luck. So, I am fortunate to be living in, I'd like to say, one of the most, if not the most progressive country to have a disability and have a chance to access things, get a fair shake, because we're always fighting. We're the biggest minorities in the world, people with disabilities. It beats out, we're at the bottom of the totem pole. So to be able to get a chance at having a level playing field is always going to be a challenge. But I like to say we're making big strides, and maybe being an example, setting precedences for other countries to follow one day. But yeah, I think culturally and what country you're in, I think we need to share that with other countries to show them what the possibilities are, right? Once they see a person that could only move their neck gets a law degree, it just breaks down all the barriers they might have thought of what was possible or not.
Right. And also to remember that, just because something is ADA compliant, it doesn't mean it's accessible.
I want to talk about that definitely more, but I'd love to hear, I think you just made a very powerful statement there about the culture, having a significant effect on the emotional and mental well-being of individuals. And I think that, that point you made about the stigma that some cultures hold is so valid, so valid. So I'm wondering if anybody can talk about, their own culture that they grew up in and perceptions around the disability and how it limited or helped. Because I'm assuming some cultures, can help the other way. I know that, for example, Carlos discussed your father actually like taking the wheelchair away and taking your crutches away. And I'm wondering, was that a cultural thing or was that just from your father?
I think that was part on him because he went through a lot of struggles when he first came to LA. He was Sicilian, my mother was Mexican, so you know it's like a cross in there. He also used to drink a lot with his friends after. He always thought that I should have a man job by driving a truck. Where I had long hair and was a musician, he didn't accept that, you know, but he's always thought I was maybe belligerent against him. And it wasn't that, it's just I lived things as a different way of life. But yeah, a lot of the things were, you know, it was like an embarrassment for him, for me, being disabled in front of his friends. You know, wrong type of friends, but you know, hey, that was my dad. I can't say nothing bad. You know, I learned to accept it.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, that definitely sounds like a kind of old world cultural perspective too.
Oh yeah,
that I
very,
think
very
other,
old world.
yeah, elderly parents may have.
If you didn't work with your hands, you weren't really working. You weren't a man. You know.
How about you, Shoreh? Did you want to speak to that? Maybe how the culture, I know you said you're from Iran, how it may have impacted you.
In my opinion, lack of knowledge makes a low culture. If, as they mentioned that, if the parents or society knows about differences or limitation instead of just disability, I think we should use a limitation, because disabled, it means there is no function. But from us, we have a limitation of function. And in my opinion, as I said, because lack of knowledge in society, which parents, relatives, schools, all makes a society, they didn't educate it. And that's why, you know, I suffered, or maybe I can say, or culturally. The other thing, one other side is you are right, because we have an expression in my language that the aql salem in badan salem. It means if you have a healthy body, then you have a healthy brain. It means you have to prove yourself if you don't have a healthy body, but it doesn't mean you don't have a healthy brain. You have a healthy brain, but maybe you don't have a healthy body. You know, I'm just saying, is it like many different aspects or many different problems, but the base is in knowledge. They don't know about that, how to deal with a limitation. The person who has a physically disabled or limitation, or look at like they have a pity for you. They don't have a empathy or sympathy. And that's why, you know, many times, because in my age, I was very young, always they told me, oh, what happened to you? You are very young. Why you are limping? You know, they didn't know that what's wrong with me. Or when I expressed my feeling, they said, look, you walk, but the other people cannot walk, but they couldn't help me, or they couldn't have empathy with me that, okay, I hurt because I have a limitation. I would like to just look at me as the same as other people, but they kind of like tell me, oh, you are not able to do that. Because for example, parents, they told me, don't run because you fell. They're scared when I just fell down. I'm just saying they should be educated.
Mm-hmm.
Did answered your question or not. I don't.
Yes, no, I think you made a lot of good points that maybe a lot of the cultures, like, we're talking about like the old world cultures, um, really it is the lack of access or limited access to education that really makes them limit the people within their culture, and not just those with physical limitations, but all around. Did you want to speak to that, Minou?
I just wanted to say that I was so glad to grow up in Los Angeles because there were so many different types of people in the culture already. I didn't feel like I stuck out as much as when I went, let's say, to see my family in the Midwest, where there weren't people from different cultures or backgrounds. And I definitely never saw other people with disabilities out on the street at all in the Midwest. In fact, I remember being a kid and everybody staring at me. And I said to a bunch of kids, I said, why don't you take a picture of me? It'll last longer. You can look at it more closely. And I was just so glad that in Los Angeles, I seemed to be just as different as everybody else that I saw. You know what I mean? There were so many different people that I didn't stick out as much. And I wanted to echo that issue of certain things can be ADA compliant, but not accessible. When my college built its first accessible bathroom, before they were finished, I said, will you let me and a couple other students actually use it before you're finished so we can tell you if it actually works? And they're like, no, we're following the codes. And then the first time I used it, I couldn't turn around and exit the bathroom. And that was before cell phones. So I had to wait in there for at least an hour, maybe more, until somebody came and got me out. So it does, accessibility or ADA compliance doesn't equal accessibility. And people with disabilities and members of the community need to be consulted whenever possible in those kinds of projects or things.
I wondered, initially you talked about physical disability and mental health. I wanted to say that being different, in particular, something that's very obvious, it definitely affects our self-concepts and our emotional development and all that. And as much as I felt that I was very, very lucky growing up in Iran, which had a lot of stigma about being disabled, and being of a Jewish minority of Iran, which meant that it was a small community and everybody knew everybody, it was very common to hide the child with disability so that it wouldn't affect the siblings' marriage opportunity. And people used to hide their disabled child, would not take them to family social functions, they would not take them out, and basically hide them. Even though my mother treated me like I was a gift to her and took me everywhere and was extremely supportive. She even took me to ballet lessons in 4th grade for a whole year and sat there as if the ballerina was performing when she sat behind the glass and watched us dance. But when I became teenager, she started not allowing any of my contacts become a romantic relationship. And and even though I was very socially active and with a lot of young men, she behaved, I learned that after many years of therapy, when I looked back, she behaved in such a way that I would never look at the guys who were approaching me as if they're approaching me because I was a female, but they are approaching me because I was their friend. And it wasn't until I came to United States got my master's in, I was undergraduate, also social work, and had worked a little bit in Iran, and came here and got my master's degree and went through psychotherapy. That I went to psychotherapy. I said to the therapist, he said, "Why are you here?" I said, "I'm 26 years old. I've been with guys all my life, and I haven't ever been kissed by a man. I've never been in a romantic relationship. Something is wrong with me. It's not something wrong with the world. Something is happening inside of me." And it was through therapy that I realized that it was my mother that was blocking and sabotaging with her loving comments from my becoming romantically involved or allowing anybody to approach me romantically. And it was then that I realized, even though she handled me so well and she gave me so many opportunities and so much acceptance, but I really wasn't accepted, because to her, I was a defective child, and no man and his family are going to accept a defective child. And after, through therapy, I met my husband and I had my daughter, and my mother came for the birth of my daughter. And one day I said to her, "Maman, how come you never let me, all those guys, when I look back, these were all signals of interest in me, and you always sabotage them?" She said, "You don't understand. If you had gotten married, the family would have destroyed you because you were disabled." And that is, I'm just giving that example of how disability affect mental functioning, subconscious and unconscious aspect of the person and the family member. My mother, who always treated me like, oh, she's just best of everything, but I wasn't best for getting married. I wasn't best for becoming a mother. And she's protected me. She said, I didn't want you to fall into that hole of being a disabled child in another family.
Wow. What a significant thing that you're really pointing out. Did anybody else want to like comment?
Can I just add something there? When I was growing up, like I said, I grew up way back in the 60s, right? The very early 60s, late 59s. They started really messing with my mind in school. The school is the one that put me where I was at, okay? I was left-handed. I went to a parochial school. Back then, being left-handed was like that's the worst thing to be. So they used to hit me consistently on my left hand, made me go to the right. Well, that's where I think we need a lot of the education there in the schools, because the schools are the ones that are going to hamper the children. They're the ones that are going to teach the children that we're different. They're the ones that are going to make some of the kids think that we're broken, even to this day. And we're not broken. So, I think there's a lot of work that has to be done through the schools. And, all the way up the community.
And I mean, we might think that these are things of the past or of like another world, this idea of, even the forcing the child to become right-handed instead of left-handed, or you were pointing out the people not bringing out their kids who had disabilities or limitations in function, right? And not sharing with their circle of friends, or just because of the difficulty, not bringing members with disabilities out into the community. And while we like to think that it's all in the past, knowing, just the communities that I work with, that it's really not in the past, that I still witness parents and families still not wanting to really talk about their children or their cousins or their siblings with disabilities for fear. And a lot of it is fear for themselves, being outcast, but a lot of it seems to be fear for the child or the family member with the disability. And I hear this about from parents all the time, and I would love each of your feedback on this, because I hear parents saying, well, I didn't want to take, my teenage daughter, for example, to this family function because it I know that they would look at her differently and it would make her feel bad, and I don't want her to feel bad. Or I don't want to involve my son in this activity because I know that he's not going to be able to do it and it's going to make him feel bad. And so it seems to be a pretty tricky line as to, you know, how much do you protect? For those who really seem to not want to engage their children or their family members in social context because of fear of rejection for them, you know, what is your advice? What is your guidance?
I think overprotection is a really big issue,
Mhm.
right? Now, my family went to the opposite extreme. So they raised me to believe and act as if I wasn't any different than anybody else. And that is good in some ways, because I expected to go to college. I expected to go to graduate school. I expected to have a career. I expected to have a relationship. I expected all of those things. I just had difficulty with all of the obstacles that might be ahead of me, that might have been a little bit different than my peers without a disability. So overprotection is one end of the spectrum that's very common. Then ignoring the disability or acting as if it shouldn't be any different than anybody else is the other end of the spectrum. And it's a difficult line to walk down the middle path and acknowledge the disability, give a child the tools that they will need to deal with their disability, and also encourage a child with a disability to be around other people with disabilities, both adults and people their own age, so that they can see that having a disability is a viable lifestyle. There are people that you can look to, mentors and other people. Oh yes, people with disabilities get married. Yes, they have children and they deal with a lot of issues, but it's possible. But it is a hard way, that middle way. That middle way is a very difficult way.
I agree with her to a point, but you know what? I think parents should be transparent to the kids and empower them to go out and try something. Because if they turn around and tell me I can't do it, or but I'm doing it for you, then what about myself? When I have time, when I'm not doing anything, I'm thinking, I say, you know what? My parents are ashamed of me, or they have lack of faith that I can't do this. So then as I'm growing up, I'm going to have that same lack of faith. You know what? Maybe I can't do that challenge, or maybe I shouldn't try that job because, it's not going to happen. So, there's that transparency that I think they should be real. They should accept it. And like what we do, Ray and myself, is we empower people. We'll give them the resources, but we won't do it for them. We'll empower them to go out and do everything that they can. And then if they have struggles, come back to us and we'll help them with the next step. But, if we don't empower them to do it, empower our kids to do it, there's always going to be that fear, that timidness, that shyness. Oh, well, I'm different, so I can't do that. I'm not different. No child is different.
Yeah, and just to follow up, I think it should be a package deal, where not only the child gets mental help, but the parent at the same time, because and also them to accept the welcoming mat to figure stuff out with a therapist psychologist, case manager, just to know what life might be, or get better understanding how the child would like to live or grow up living with you, and all the supportive things that the parents can do. And in hindsight, they will learn a lot about themselves and give their children a better outlook and a better life, and them also psychologically dealing with all that stuff. It'll help both at the same time, I think.
Right, and to educate them, to empower them that, you know what, no matter what, teach somebody. If somebody's looking at you, go up to them and ask them, hey, what is it, you know, what is it you see about me that you don't understand? Because you know what, by doing that, if something happens to that person or to that person's family, they'll remember that time they spoke to you, and they'll remember that, you know what, I met somebody like that, and hey, he was doing a great job. So that's why we like to teach people and empower people and make them understand, you know what, we take the dis out of disability. Because you know what, like we told you earlier, that everybody's going to be where we're at one time or another. And if we've taught you a little bit, it'll be one less step you have to take when it happens to you or your family member.
What? To expand on what you, Carlos is saying, is that we can't forget siblings. I think that when a member of the family has a obvious difference and has limitations in managing day-to-day life and socially also, it affects the siblings of that person too. And it wasn't until my granddaughter read the book I wrote about my own growing up that said to me, I feel so bad for uncles, that she identified with my brothers who were older than me and had been in situation that they were brothers of a child with different ability, that I had never thought of it at the age 80, 81. I had never thought of how it affected my siblings. It was my granddaughter who brought it to my attention, that she sympathized and empathized with my brothers who were older than me and were in the situations that I was coping with life and growing up. And I think that we cannot leave out siblings of the person who is different.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I believe that the society would just generally be better if all of us had the opportunity to talk with someone about our issues without any stigma. You know, someone who is trained, someone who is not directly involved with our personal lives. I think it would be such a different world to live in if more of us had access to mental health services and use them regularly.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here for this first part of the Access for All panel on physical disabilities. We're going to have part 2 in our next video, but at this point, I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers for giving their time and wisdom and being here today. I want to remind everyone that if you are in need of mental health resources, support, you can call the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health's Access Helpline at 1-800-854-7771. I also want to invite you to listen to our other podcast episodes, as well as our YouTube series of programs that also address topics around mental health and wellness as it relates to the deaf and hard of hearing, blind, and physically disabled communities. For links to our podcast and YouTube videos, you can reach out to Cross Cultural Expressions by emailing us at connectwithcce@gmail.com. You can also find links by going to our website cceccc.org. And we're going to talk about resources and all kinds of other stuff in part 2 of this particular video. So please join us, and thank you all again.